Welcome everyone. Welcome to our last episode of Race in the PR Classroom for this season. My name is Anitra Henry, and I am the Senior Director of Strategic Initiatives for the Institute for Public Relations. I'm so excited to welcome you to session 17 of Race in the PR Classroom, presented by the Institute for Public Relations and the PR Educators Academy. We are so grateful you are here with us today. Joining me is Dr. Nika Logan, an associate professor at Virginia Tech University and diversity chair of the PRSA Educators Academy. Wave, Nika. I'd like to also recognize our sponsor, the Moody College of Communication at the University of Texas at Austin. Thank you so much for supporting Race in the PR Classroom. IPR and PRSA Educators Academy have been partnering on Race in the PR Classroom since June of 2020. In that time, we have featured primarily Black, Indigenous, people of color leaders talking about race in the PR classroom. Today, we will be discussing the tenure process and how this impacts people of color in the education system. We are excited to welcome our 4 panelists today. First, we have Dr. Juliana Trammell, an associate professor of journalism and mass communications at Savannah State University, with 12 years in the field of communication that includes journalism, public relations, organizational and strategic communication, and communications research. We also have Dr. T. Ken Gaither, a professor of strategic communications who holds the A.J. Fletcher Professorship at the Elon University School of Communications, where he teaches courses in international public relations, and mass communication. Our next panelist is Dr. Cristina Azocar, a citizen of the Upper Mattaponi Indian Tribe and a professor of journalism at San Francisco State University. Her research focuses on the intersection of race and journalistic practice, particularly in the area of news coverage of Indigenous people. And last but not least, we welcome Dr. Juan-Carlos Molleda, a tenured professor at the Edwin L. Artzt Dean of School of Journalism and Communication at the University of Oregon. Dr. Molleda has accumulated more than 2 decades of experience teaching and researching public relations and communication management at the universities of Florida, the University of South Carolina, and Radford University. Thank you all so much for being here and sharing your personal experiences with us. Before we begin, I'd like to share a few housekeeping rules. This is a Q&A type forum. To ask a question, feel free to drop it in the chat or use the raise your hand function in Zoom. Once you're called on, please remember to state your name and organization. If you would like to ask a question anonymously, please type the message to the host in the chat and we will read your question aloud. Only the moderators can see your question, so you will remain anonymous. Today's session will be recorded and will be available for playback later on today. Lastly, please remain respectful to our hosts and panelists and others on the call by keeping yourself muted at all times unless you intend to speak or ask a question. Now, let's get to it. I'll turn everything over to you, Nika.
Okay, thank you so much, Anitra, for that warm welcome. And thank you to our panelists for being here today. And then thank you to all of our guests and attendees for attending during such a busy time in the semester. So we'll get started with our first question. And that is, having teachers from a variety of racial, ethnic, and political identities is advantageous because diversifying the field helps to make it more well-rounded. What role do you think the tenure process plays in enhancing the classroom environment or the climate? And Professor Molleda, would you like to get us started by addressing that first question?
Yes, thank you so much, Nika, and thank you so much, Anitra, for the introduction. I'm happy to be here with my colleagues. Diversity, equity, and inclusion has become really important from the hiring process to post-tenure review. In fact, I just announced a new hire here at the University of Oregon with a great emphasis on diversity, equity, and inclusion. Concerning the tenure promotion process, research, teaching, and service has to be embedded into all the EI. And many universities like ours are requesting statements on the EI. In terms of teaching in the classroom, we really appreciate that the faculty member articulates his or her or their vision concerning the EI in terms of contents, in terms of delivery, in terms of participation and engagement with the students. And the new evaluation process that we use, both for peer review, but also for a student evaluation of a faculty member, includes issues of diversity, equity, and inclusion. In addition to that, we have introduced a new component in our evaluation system in which the faculty member can also reflect on his, her, or their vision and philosophy concerning diversity, equity, and inclusion in the classroom. So the tenure process really helps in articulating this philosophy, the actions, and the specific components, and it's an ongoing conversation between, in our case, the case preparation committee, the faculty personnel committee, and those peers who evaluate the teaching in the classroom for that specific case.
Thank you so much for Professor Molleda for sharing that. And I appreciate hearing how DEI is embedded through all the various aspects and actually counts. I think that's so important. It shows that you guys are giving much more than lip service to the process. Dr. Trammell, may we turn to you? Would you take a moment to address the question? And please let me know if you'd like for me to repeat it.
Yeah, well, the first thing that comes to mind when it comes to diversity, equity, inclusion, the tenure process is the role the administrators play in the process. Because once you get on tenure track, it's there to stay for a while. You're on tenure track for 5, maybe 6 years, and then you have post tenure. And if we don't often think about diversity in the very beginning, in diversifying the pool, right? Before a faculty gets on tenure track, the entire department may feel the challenge of not having diversity in the faculty demographics. So one of the things as a chair, we often think about how diverse the pool is, because once we have a diverse pool, we are setting in place diversity, equity, inclusion for 6-7 years for the department. So if that thought is not put in place in the beginning, it's challenging to see the tenure, how tenure promotion can be blended, with diversity in the classroom. When it comes to being a tenure faculty, a faculty on a tenure track, because I work in a historical Black college. So most of the way we use diversity in our classroom is in with service. Several faculty members get engaged with promoting programs. They attract speakers from diverse backgrounds, and that's done particularly as part of their service. Because we are accredited, our program is accredited by ACEJMC, the Accrediting Council in Education of Journalism and Mass Communications. We have a standard 3, which is diversity. So we have to justify how diversity is being implemented in our curriculum, how diversity is being displayed through our personnel, the demographics of faculty and staff, and also how diversity is being exercised through enrollment, of students in our program. So as far as going back to the tenure track process, we see it more as the service component that the faculty on tenure track can provide in all those goals and responsibilities that we have.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Dr. Trammell. Again, another very comprehensive approach, and I appreciate the perspective from an HBCU and how you guys also embrace that process. I think I'd like to switch questions now as we shift to some other panelists. So I'd like to come to you, Dr. Azocar, and ask you if you might describe for us the relationship between tenure and what is taught in college classrooms, and how that might work. So in other words, how does who has tenure affect what is taught? And of course, all of our panelists can contextualize this for their own discipline and your own institution. So what are your thoughts on that, Dr. Azocar?
Right, thank you. And thank you for that question. So, if you think about the tenure process, and those who get tenure now have academic freedom to give us a space to be more open about the things we discuss. And sometimes I feel like before I had tenure, I was a little more tenuous in my conversations with students about race and gender and just all areas of diversity. And then once I got tenure, I thought, well, I feel like I can now have talk about some more deeper, hard questions and really go into structure, a lot more structural inequity, and go and take deeper dives. And also, me being an Indigenous person from this country, I think there's so much that people don't know already coming in, just because of our educational system. The system is set up so that we don't know. And that's not just for Indigenous people, but for Black and Asian and Latinos. And for, the system is set up so that we don't learn about a lot of people. We have a historical past, and then we're brought to the present where everything is okay. And so one of the things that I found that I was able to do was really be more challenging to students and say, like, why do you think that? Where is that coming from? And without tenure, of course, we don't want to have bad teaching evaluations, right? Because teaching, especially if you're at a teaching institution, teaching matters so much on when you're in the tenure process. And I remember I taught for the first time after I was tenured a class called Social Impact in Journalism. And I taught it almost entirely from an Indigenous perspective. Like I didn't feel like I had to be broad anymore. I thought, I'm going to take a deep dive into this with students. But without that, I think that I would have been more reluctant, because I wouldn't want it to have negative teaching evaluations. It's like, all she talks about is Indian people. What about all these other people? And so that academic freedom to me is one of the most important aspects of tenure, especially for people of color who are teaching in places or subjects that may not be as open as, for instance, if you're in a place like San Francisco State. But even at San Francisco State, there are people who are not open to hearing different perspectives.
I really appreciate what you have to say about history there, especially in our contemporary environment, where we see there's currently a battle over what can be taught as history right now. Dr. Gaither, I'd love to turn to you and ask you this same question. How does who has tenure affect what is taught?
So thank you for that question. I think that the question of tenure relates deeply to institutional values. And so in other words, people need to be hired who represent diverse backgrounds and all the different forms of diversity. And then they need to be put in a position where they can succeed to go through the tenure process, right? So that's the inclusion piece. So we talk about the diversity piece, it's having a deep pool and having a diverse pool. And then once we get them into academe, we need to provide the supports and the context for them to really succeed. So those two pieces of diversity and inclusion have to really come to bear. And that's part of the classroom experience, of course, right? So how is DEI valued within the institution? How is it measured? How are faculty being held accountable, right? So all of these kinds of questions come to bear. And I think what I look at is institutional values and how are those values practiced And every university will have a DEI statement somewhere. But the question comes back to, how do you actually practice it? Show me the results, right? And so I think it's not enough just to have the values. You also have to have the accountability and the real milestones. And I think those need to be recorded and shared as well, because you need to create that environment for faculty of diverse backgrounds to come in, to feel comfortable, to feel supported, and to know, depending on the institution, they're going to face challenges that their peers who are white will not face, right?
Yeah, I really appreciate those insights as well, because as we know, academia, it can be isolating on its own. No matter who you are, where you're from, you spend a lot of time alone, reading, writing, thinking, and then, going through the whole process again and like, oh, that doesn't make sense. But it can be especially alienated if you come from a background that is not represented within the academy. So I really appreciate what you say about having embedded at the institutional level in ways that make people feel included. Professor Molleda, I wonder if you would share your perspectives on the question, how does who has tenure affect what is taught? And maybe even how it's taught?
Yeah, Nika, you know that tenure, the tenure process and the tenure as an institution is being challenged in many states around the country. That is not the case in the state of Oregon, and that is not the case at the University of Oregon in Eugene. This is a very progressive and very activist community. And I can see that, I can say that with the reference I have from my former institutions in Virginia, South Carolina, and Florida, that here everyone has a voice. When I say everyone, it's everyone, even, it's the students, it's the undergrads and grads, the faculty and staff, and alumni and everyone in the community who wants to have a discussion with us. So I don't see a great difference between our junior faculty and our senior faculty, especially faculty of color or a variety of backgrounds. I think here, in fact, otherwise, there is an expectation here in Oregon that you will be addressing those issues in the classroom. There is an expectation that you will have frank and open discussions in the classroom. And I am not saying that everything is rosy, everything is perfect, there is no dissenting voices. There are no voices that are going to criticize this approach, because there are, but the majority, the environment allows a faculty member to do so. I have a case of a faculty member of color who have flourished in the classroom because of her scholarship. So even before tenure, we also encourage faculty members, especially those in which diversity, equity, and inclusion and issues of social justice and so forth are part of their scholarship, to really highlight those both in content, delivery, and engagement of the students.
That's amazing. I think we all want to pick up and go to Oregon right now. I really appreciate how you describe everybody having a voice. I think that's so important, and being able to, and connecting your teaching not only to your scholarship. So in other words, the faculty member that you described is able to pursue scholarship that's fulfilling, and then connect that to the teaching in a way that supports DEI. That's wonderful that you guys have such an inclusive environment that allows faculty and faculty of color to thrive. Okay, now let's see here. I will move. I have so many great questions, but I'm trying to prioritize them and make use of our time here. So I think I'd like to ask next a question about the tenure process itself. From my understanding, it can somewhat be shrouded in mystery. You're like reading tea leaves, trying to just get a hint of what's happening and where you are in the process. Can you share a little bit about your own tenure experience, what you went through, and then perhaps maybe how you counsel others to go through the process? And then we'll stay here with you, Professor Molleda, if you wouldn't mind. Can you share a little bit about your own tenure experience first, and then maybe how you address that as a leader?
Yes. When I was just a faculty member, well, I should rephrase that. When I was a faculty member, I'm still a faculty member. I was an international faculty member, and very grateful to have come to this country for my education and then to start my academic career. I follow the regulations. I really became familiar with the tenure and promotion guidelines. And I asked all the questions you can imagine, you know. I kept that in mind since the moment I was hired. So my promotion and tenure process, I would say, was done by the book, by following guidelines and being sure that I interpret those guidelines accordingly. Something that I would recommend is that you try to connect your teaching, research, and service in a way that seems consistent and complementary. And this is something that I try to do. And then the most important part, especially when I moved from Florida to Oregon, is that since day one, we need to make sure that we understand the importance of networking with our colleagues. And the importance not only in doing well in the classroom, well in terms of research and service, but also who knows about your work and who really is aware of your efforts. So I was very, very conscious of that. But in addition to that, you know, I am very sociable. So I like to be all and about, especially in the conferences. So I made sure that I was very active participants in academic conferences and even in professional conferences, and being sure that people knew who I was and my work. So I think it's a combination of understanding guidelines, making sure that you understand the importance of complementing service teaching and research, and really developing your network of colleagues and scholars that really recognize that you are here to make a difference and to really produce good work and to be part of this incredible academic community.
Thank you so much. I think those are some great points there, especially number one, like following the rules, knowing what the rules are for your institution. But that other piece is important too, the networking piece, getting out there, especially if you're kind of shy, breaking out of your comfort zone to make sure you know who you need to know and they know you. Absolutely. Dr. Trammell, I wonder if you would talk to us a little bit about your tenure process. Are there experiences from your tenure journey that you could share some insights, perhaps? Uh-oh, I think, Dr. Trammell, are you frozen? Okay, while we wait for Dr. Trammell to become unfrozen, oh, the joys of Zoom, we'll move on to Dr. Azocar.
Okay.
If you, well, oh, you're back. Yay! Christmas. All right, my wish came true. Okay, Dr. Trammell, would you like to repeat?
Yeah, I understand. I heard the question. So my own tenure experience, I guess I can speak from the traditional challenges of being on tenure track, but I can also speak of being an international faculty on tenure track. You know, so I had to deal with those two different worlds. I benefited because the PhD program that I came from had a very strong preparing future faculty program. So that gave me some understanding of the expectations of being on tenure track. And so that was a little bit easier, but not to minimize the stress and the rigor of knowing that you had to go up for tenure. What I would say is time management is very important. Where I went for tenure, here at Savannah State, there's a focus on teaching. So I had to balance, being on tenure track, but also keeping the teaching load and the service load and the scholarship. So for me, it was challenging, but it was manageable just because of knowing the expectations made easier to achieve those expectations.
Absolutely. And I have a follow-up question for you, because you have something that I'm looking to achieve at some point in life, and that is an APR. Can you talk a little bit about the challenges of trying to balance the pursuit of tenure, but then also wanting to get something that's very important in our own field, which is an APR? Can you talk about that experience and maybe what people who are trying to decide how to pursue both and prioritize, can you share some of your insights with them?
Well, I don't have both. I tried to have both. I went in trying to have my APR after I got tenure, after I got promoted to associate professor. And at that time, my university asked me also to step up to become chair of the department. And it was very difficult to balance both. And even though I saw the value of having the APR for my own professional individual goals, it was difficult to meet the expectations of the process of being post-tenure, being a senior faculty, right? Once you get tenure, things just don't go away. Actually, it becomes, to me, more time consuming, because now the university sees you as someone that can lead, someone that can take on senior roles at the university. So at that point, when I was thinking about doing my APR, I couldn't finish, because the amount of work in balancing being the post-tenure phase and being administrator at the university, balancing teaching, we still teach, it was something that was really hard to maintain. And I hope that in the future, universities can acknowledge APR as something significant for the university, because for me, APR would come as professional achievement. I already have a PhD, so there is no, even though we engage in continuing education, it was too much of a price, of a time price, with a time cost attached to APR, that you take a community to support, course release, some kind of a load release to be able to accomplish everything that we are called to accomplish. So I did not finish my APR process. I started. It was at that point that I became chair of the department. We are also going through accreditation. So I had to put on the balance, what would be the priority. And it has been hard to sell the idea of the APR with the time commitment that we need, and then manage everything else.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. That in itself was a lesson in trying to prioritize all of these different responsibilities that can pull us in a variety of different directions. And so when the stars align and the timing is right, you and I can be APR buddies, and we can walk that walk together. As soon as the stars line up for that, I'm for it. Dr. Gaither, would you share a little bit about your perspective and your journey to tenure? What were your experiences like?
So I'll speak to it from two perspectives. One is a little bit of my own journey, and the other part is I served on the university's P&T committee last year, so I was able to see it from that angle. So for my own journey, I came from a Research 1 Ph.D. Background, so it was inculcated in me that I should pursue research, and that should drive my professional activity. And I had to sort of recalibrate when I came to Elon. So I think one of the lessons is when you take a position is make sure you have a good understanding of the balance between teaching, research, and service. It varies a little bit by institution. It's not 33 1/3 equal weight for each one, right? There's a little bit of weight. And so knowing what that weight is really important. I think it's important to identify a mentor or somebody within the department you can really learn from regarding the P&T process, because you're going to take some bumps along the way, particularly if it's your first semester teaching. Many who are coming from PhD backgrounds might have a little bit of teaching experience, but just becoming a newly minted faculty member is a process in and of itself. So being able to learn and to lean on somebody who can just provide guidance throughout the whole process, I think is critically important. And I guess what else I would think of for my own journey was just finding my way and beginning to be really intentional about what I was doing early on. So I think, again, it is important to know what does it look like to become a tenured faculty member, right? What are the expectations? What are going back to the guidelines and being aware of those right off the bat? Because one of the things that really drives the process is at some point you have to be able to provide an evidence-based narrative of what you've done in teaching, research, and service. And there's going to be context in there. And I think one of the values of the process is it gives you that chance to provide some context if you take advantage of it. So you can explain how your first semester was a difficult adjustment. Your teaching evaluations were not reflective of who you are as a teacher. Here's what you're doing about it, right? So that whole context becomes part of the process. And so I think between being aware right off the bat of what the expectations are, driving your professional activity in alignment with the institutional values between teaching, research, and service, and finding a mentor, those would be 3 recommendations I would make, particularly for newly minted PhDs who are tenure track.
Yeah, those are excellent recommendations, all of them. And one that was really helpful to me is just mentors, right? Mentors in my own department. We don't have an official mentorship program, but we have informal mentoring, but then mentoring elsewhere from people from other universities just to get ideas and to help you not feel so stressed out going through the process and reminding you to breathe. But mentorship, I think in this journey, the value of it, along with all the other wonderful things that you shared with us, Professor Gaither, are invaluable. But just having someone who's been through it before to give you that advice and also like calm your nerves is great. Dr. Azocar, I'd love to hear from you. And would you mind sharing with us a little bit about your own tenure experiences, what that was like?
Yeah, so it was horrible.
Appreciate your honesty.
What happened, what I realized when I started my position, that there were going to be at least 3 people who were going to try to block me all the way through. And so what I ended up having to do was figure out how you can be politically strategic if you know that there are people who are not happy that you are there. And so one of the things that I did was I went to the associate at San Francisco State. There's an associate dean for faculty affairs. And so instead of going through my department, I went directly to the source and I said, what do I need? So I could not rely on my chair. I couldn't rely on my dean. And so I went like, okay, I have to go above them. And so I had them walk me through the process. And so the thing was, in my department, I realized I kept asking for our criteria and I was never provided with them. So I was provided with them kind of during the interview process, but kind of once I got there, it was very mysterious. And so I said, okay, I want the criteria. And then what I had to do was develop allies outside of my own department, because I didn't really have anybody who I could be mentored by. Plus, I was also the first PhD hired in my department. So everybody else were practicing journalists. And so there was a weird expectation of what I would be producing versus what they produced for their tenure. So I got allies outside of my department. I went to the College of Ethnic Studies. So I was in the College of Humanities then, and San Francisco State has the only College of Ethnic Studies in the country. And so I was like, okay, I'm going there where my people are so I can ask them because I feel like I'm going to get better advice. So throughout my tenure process, also what I did was we had to have a long review every 2 years. I asked for a long review every year. Like, I want a long review every year, because that way I know that I'm not going to have nobody can say, well, 2 years ago you didn't do this. So again, this is like political strategy. What can you do if you feel like you might have entered a hostile environment, or it becomes some sort of a hostile environment, right? We all think of San Francisco State. Oh, it's all kumbaya over there. Well, it wasn't. And so I just did that very early. I asked for a long review. They were not happy with me, but they couldn't say no. And then, I got my PhD from University of Michigan, and Travis Dixon was, many of you might know, Travis Dixon was my major advisor. And so what he taught me was, as I started every conference, I was looking for letter writers, right? Doing that networking. He also said, you've got to self-promote. Like, you need to learn, even if you're not comfortable with it, you've got to self-promote, because nobody is going to promote you. In academia, we are very self-centered in many ways. And so you've got to be your own best ally. And so when I wrote my narrative, I basically wrote my narrative as our RTP criteria. In this, I've got this. In this, I've got this. In this, I've got this. I did this, this, this. And so that way, the clearer you are, and I was so anally organized, like, I could have written here is how to the most anally organized process, because I also didn't want them to say, oh, it was so disorganized, I couldn't read it, I couldn't find anything. So then from the chair's perspective, because then I was a department chair, and I changed our criteria, like I moved our criteria forward, and I was like, nobody is ever going to have the horrible experience that I had. I changed it so it was very clear, so that people coming in would know what they needed to do and get mentors. But my advice was always follow the criteria to the letter, right? Because then they can't negate what you say. Is like, if you've got the evidence. But I've also had faculty members who waited till after their deadline to get their external review, all that information that they had to. And so then I'm scrambling to help them do it, because they've missed deadlines. So don't miss deadlines. And then what I'd say, I was like, this is going to be the critical one for me, because I just had such a horrible experience, and I never want anybody to have to go through that again. And know your enemies. Right? If you know you have enemies, then figure out why they are your enemies, so that when it comes up, whatever your narrative says, you can actually say something in the narrative that it can't, like, horse turn your enemy possibly, but it can be your response to them in advance. Right? Exactly. So then, I'm going to go on to the next level for promotion. Is when I went up for promotion, my committee told me I was not ready. I was like, wait a minute, I've got this is San Francisco State, right? None of you have any peer-reviewed journals. None of you have a single authored original research book. Like, why are you telling me I'm not ready? And so I had stepped down from being the chair so I could go for full. And so I realized that I wasn't going to be supported at this level either, going for full. And so when I wrote my narrative, I wrote that narrative as if I were writing it from my department chair. I wrote the chair's letter for myself, something. So that, and it was really long. It was much longer than it was supposed to be, but there's just it's a suggested length. I was like, then they can't dispute anything I say, because I'm going to write it like I'm the chair of the department. And then read those reviews very carefully that you get at each step, and make sure you are addressing those. So I'll stop there. Sorry to go off.
No, you could go on and on. That was such great and rich advice. First of all, I am sorry that your process was like that, but I appreciate you sharing it, because I've heard horror stories, and it is not uncommon for faculty, especially faculty from underrepresented groups, to experience exactly what you described, being blocked before you even have a chance. So I appreciate that you shared a lot of strategies that can help people deal with that, and I appreciate that you shared what the brutality of going up for tenure can be. But if you have any graduate students or assistant professors, I hope y'all were taking notes, because that is exactly how to manage that situation. And anything that you get in those letters, that's like, from the P&T committee, like, oh, you need to attend more conferences, or you need to do exactly that. And then one little tip I'll share from my own experience, you may not be able to tell it now, but I'm a pretty shy, quiet, reserved person. I can spend most of my time myself, but it was really intimidating for me to try to build a network like what Juan-Carlos described in meeting people. So for my first 4 years, I was shy. And then my last 2 years, I was like, okay, you actually need to go meet people. So even if it seems daunting now, put it off for a future goal, but at least 2 to 3 years before you go up, you got to make some friends. But okay, what a rich discussion. Let's see.
And also, if I can add, especially if you are young, and sometimes if you a person of color, can be also challenging, because sometimes you come into a tenure track position and you right fresh from the PhD program, have lots of publications, and you might join a program where you are the only PhD. That was my case when I first came. And so there is that cultural shock for your colleagues, because at times, your deans, your provosts might be excited to often repeat your name in public. So-and-so just published a piece, and that can create another level of expectation for the department that they were not expecting before. Because something that is important about the tenure process is a cultural style, and that culture change sometimes depending on who is the dean, who is the provost. I've been at the same institution for 15 years, and I have seen how the same handbook, the same process has changed over time because of who the players are. So a lot of times, every time someone comes in and 2 people come in and 3 faculty come in, they'll change the whole culture. And that can be good or bad. So I think being able to understand the cultural change and how to play that game in a sense, right between lines, can be also beneficial. In my case, I saw the age challenge also. I was very young. I saw and also the publication culture challenge. And that also in itself created a situation for me. But eventually I used the culture of silence for me. I would not announce my publications often. I would just put in my resume, put in my CV, keep doing what I'm supposed to do. Of course, over time, it changed, the culture changed. And so I became more comfortable in sharing my accomplishments. But it's important to understand the culture of where you are, and that culture can change too over time.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Dr. Trammell. That point about culture, knowing the culture of your institution and that it can change, is absolutely critical to your ability to navigate the choppy, potentially waters of tenure. Professor Gaither, you had your hand up. Please share.
Yeah, I just want to emphasize a point that's already been raised about how important it is to know the criteria and to have the criteria. That's the one thing that is unassailable. And so that criteria should be woven into the P&T process in terms of how you document what you've done. That's the only thing that you really have to lean on at the end of the day. And so even if there have been personnel changes, leadership changes, the criteria should be documented, and it should be a critical part of the process. Really, that's what you have to lean on, and that is the shared grammar between you and who will be evaluating you, right? The same criteria. So I just really want to emphasize that. And something else I just want to mention is how important it is to stand up for yourself, particularly early on in the process. I think a lot of faculty members who are untenured are afraid of doing so. But if you do not stand up for yourself, you might find yourself buried under service obligations. You might find yourself being pulled in all these different directions. And so learning how to navigate those politically, what should you say yes to, what should you say no to, is such an important part of the mentoring process. But I do think it's important early on that you engage yourself where your interests are, you stand up when you need to. And learning how to do that really comes from having a good mentor who can help you navigate those tides.
Absolutely. Cristina, I see you have your hand up, and then Alexandra made an excellent point in the chat, and I wonder if we could address that next. And thank you for rejoining us, Dr. Molleda. So let's go with Cristina, and then Dr. Molleda, and then maybe collectively address Alexandra's comment, because I think it's an important one. Okay.
I just want to make 2 quick points. Is that once you get tenure, you need to be the change, right? You need to help change the culture of your department. And that's one of the things I'm very proud of, is that I became chair. And I was like, there's no more of this bullshit that's going to happen anymore. Like, and then the other thing is, so I've been on the accreditation committee, and now I was on the council, and I'm on the committee, and the criteria for Standard 3 is changing, right? Standard 3 is changing. You have to have much more evidence-based. And so the one thing that when you are in a position, if you're in an accreditation cycle, please be honest with that team that comes in and talk about the problems that you have, because that's going to translate. That's going to potentially give a non-compliance on that. And then it's going to make your department or your unit be held accountable to the issues that you might be having.
Thank you so much for sharing that. That's a great point, because oftentimes no one wants to air their dirty laundry, but sometimes you do need to be honest and transparent. Professor Molleda.
Thank you so much for the question and the comments. And in fact, I left the meeting because I am in a 5-year review process, that was extended because of COVID. So that was an important meeting with the chair of that committee, talking about the evaluations. And they asked me for feedback, and I was very outspoken because I really care about my fellow deans that are coming up in this process. And that relates to the discussion, because I think the tenure process starts before the process. And I think in my case, as an administrator, as a dean, I make sure that when I meet with faculty, junior faculty especially, every year for their annual evaluations and the midterm review, it's about the third year of their employment with us. They really understand that they are progressing toward this process and what it will take for them to be in that process. Yes, mentorship is important. I think it comes in a variety of ways. We can really assign a mentor to someone. Some people need more mentorship than others, or different types of mentorship. So it's important for us to understand what type of mentorship we are talking about and what type of mentorship that individual in particular needs. And in fact, we have a faculty member also from an underrepresented group that needed a mentorship from outside this university, and for a variety of reasons. And we achieved that. We recruited someone. Even we are giving a compensation to that person to be the mentor. And to finish that also, how the process is handled in different institutions is really important, because something that I like about my current institution is that we have a case preparation committee, and the case preparation committee works with the candidate to be able to put, the packet together, and then goes to the faculty personnel committee, and then goes to the senior associate dean and myself, and then we review all the materials together. But it should not be a surprise for any candidate, especially a candidate that have a very unique scholarship and very unique challenges in his or her or their teaching and service and research. And transparency is important. There is a moment in which transparency doesn't occur. That is when the package is submitted to the provost office and then there is a vacuum or a dark hole. Nobody knows what is going on. And the only thing that I can say to the faculty member is, first, you have a sense of how strong the case is. And second, you say, if we don't hear anything from the provost office, it's good news. But even that is not an answer, but that also helps. So it's going along with the faculty member to make sure that the faculty member doesn't feel alone and doesn't feel that the process is very obscure.
Yeah, absolutely. Such wonderful and rich advice to help one manage any situation that they might encounter, whether you're fortunate enough to walk down the yellow brick fairy tale road or whether you have a more challenging path to tenure. I think the discussion today has really surfaced a lot of great insights that can help us manage the horror story or the fairy tale. I think I'd like to close with this question. As we know, tenure can be, stressful, even if your process goes very, very well, but that waiting period that Juan-Carlos, Professor Molleda just shared with us, that waiting period, the uncertainty, you just don't know. Oh, wait a minute. I was going to ask a question, but I just see one from Carmela in the chat. And so maybe we'll switch to that. And then we'll, if there's time, we'll address my question, which was basically going to be, how do you manage self-care during the process? But before we get to that, let's address Carmela's question. For tenured colleagues who are intentional about blocking other professors, does the immunity of tenure allow them to deviate from ethical treatment of colleagues who are tenure track? Is there no need to maintain or sustain institutional values? So which one of our panelists would like to shed a little insight? Okay, go, Cristina, go.
So I'm so jaded with how people turn on you, right? And I think that that's some weird thing about academia where I've known people who were colleagues who got tenure and then who just the ethics seem to go out the door after that. And so there is no consequence for them doing that either. As I see, unless you can get yourself into the position, because nobody wants to be the department chair, right? So it is a way that you can, even if you don't want to do it, you can get in there and try to make some long-term changes. And so things like I did was I created a bylaws for the department. Like everybody had to vote on it, but I started that process of creating governance in your unit that could figure out a way to hold people accountable as much as possible. But again, there is no consequence for them if they have these unethical actions. And so all you can do is just try to shore yourself up personally or take on those leadership roles after tenure that help so that it doesn't continue to get passed down. Unfortunately, I see some women and women of color acting even worse than other people did because it's always such a weird thing to me that when I was going up for full professor, it was the women in my department who were blocking me and the white dean above me who really said, like, I don't understand why they're saying these things in the RTP letter. Like it just seems incorrect. And so it was that person the dean who was not my, who I didn't see as necessarily an ally, who was just kind of this new guy. Mm-hmm. He ended up being my support. And so I think that we all need to get out of that mode of academia is not this selfish ideal. It is a thing that we all need to help other people and try to move away from that culture.
Yeah, absolutely. Great points. And I'll just add 2 cents, and it's really echoing what I heard Professor Gaither and Molleda say. Know the rules. Like if it says you're supposed to have X number of publications, don't have X, have 2 more than that, have 4 more than that. Right. And if there's a question on what actually counts, book chapters versus journal articles, be clear on that. So when you go up, you have dotted every I and crossed every T. That's the one thing that I've learned that can somewhat help. Know the rules and follow the rules. Professor Gaither.
Just quickly, I'm going to add partially to that point, how important it is to give yourself time, right? If it's too late into the process and you realize you don't have enough publications, it is too late. So you really have to pace yourself and recognize academe moves so slowly. So getting those publications the whole way through, getting them published, that takes time. And so I think one of the best things you can do for self-care is to be very intentional, to be planning for this well in advance, and to give yourself lots of time. So you know you can meet all the criteria, you've got it buttoned down, and you have enough time to capture all of the evidence you need to really strengthen your case.
Professor Molleda, I see your hand is up.
Yes, and also I agree with Ken. And in addition to that, if you have an honest conversation with the case preparation committee or the faculty personnel committee, whoever the committee is or your dean or your department head, and the recommendation is, you can wait an extra year.
Yes.
You can take advantage, especially during the COVID years. We gave COVID extensions. We have given extensions because of health reasons. We have given extension for other reasons. So just take advantage of those extensions. Do not believe that that's going to put you in a bad position. Otherwise, if you believe that an extra year is going to help you out to really make your case stronger, just take advantage of that, and also use your mentors, your advocates, and your colleagues to be able to make that type of decision.
Absolutely. That extra year might be a great use of self-care. And in the couple minutes that we have left, I'd like our panelists to just share maybe 1 or 2 things that you would recommend for self-care during the tenure process. Professor Trammell, I see that you're unmuted and ready to contribute. Or maybe Professor Trammell, do you want to share any self-care tips that you have?
Well, in that case, I would say time management is really important. It's going to be a lot when you go on tenure track. Some institutions have 3 or 4 or 5 criteria. So being able to balance time is important, knowing the expectations and balancing your time. In my case, Fridays was my day to really focus on myself. That meant publications, research, as well as just take some time off. But definitely time management and knowing the expectations.
Excellent. Professor Molleda.
Speak up. Speak up when you are stressed. Speak up when you are overwhelmed. Speak up when you need to understand a component of this process. And even if you're doing well, because I have faculty members who even are doing really well, they speak up when they are in a moment that they can crash or they can or they feel burnout. So speak up, and hopefully, your colleagues and administration is going to hear you, listen to your concerns, and help you out to navigate those stressful times.
Absolutely, absolutely. Professor Azocar, any thoughts on self-care before we close out?
Yes, so I would just recommend whatever service requirements you have to do is you do the bare minimum, because nobody ever not gets tenure after service, but that those service opportunities also help you, that they So for me, it was doing things like being part of the Native American Journalists Association. So things that fed my soul, but also inadvertently also counted for service. So service that makes you happy. And if you like students, then I guess we're all supposed to like students. If you like students.
Hopefully you like students.
That came out weird. So if you really enjoy working on student projects, then find those ways to, again, feed your soul, but to get those service requirements that you need to do.
Okay, last word, Professor Molleda. Oh, your hand is up. Oh, no, you already had your last word. Okay, well.
Dr. Gaither.
Oh, Dr. Gaither.
Oh, well, we are short on time, but the last thing I'll just leave with is how critical it is to recognize that the tenure process is about representation. It's about how you represent yourself. And so to learn how to do that, it's really important that you talk to as many people who've gone through the process at that institution and elsewhere, because there's no one size fits all. Every process is just a little bit different, but getting a sense of how they planned and they prepared is, I think, a big part of the self-care and leaning on those people who've been through those trenches of P&T.
Absolutely. Well, thanks so much to all of our panelists and all of this rich discussion. I turn it over to Anitra and just thank everybody again.
Yes, thank you all for being here. This was such an amazing panel. I encourage all of you who are here to make sure that you go back. So much information. You definitely want to catch the replay on this one. So thank you all again, for everyone, for attending. Also, this is our last one for this season. We will catch you in September, and have an amazing end of your quarter or semester, and we'll see you all again soon. Thank you for attending Race in the PR Classroom.